There's going to be a pretty good delay on here because I wanted to make sure that I was coming through on YouTube, and it looks like I am. So, welcome everyone. My name is Ian Boyd. I'm a library specialist working in the Learning Spaces and Services Department at NCSU Libraries, and I've been doing a series on Touch Designer, which is kind of what I want to get back into again this week and kind of bring a new thing at you. So if you've been following these in the past, you'll be a little bit familiar with how these work. Basically, I kind of take you through one of my projects and show you, kind of break it down, show you how it works, show you how to make something cool inside of Touch Designer, kind of showcase a way to use the software. I think actually, having said that though, this one is going to be a little bit different. So in general, usually I have a project and I kind of break it down. I think today this is going to be more of a teaching thing. We're going to go through here. Cool. I think it's going to be more of a teaching thing. We're going to go through, we're going to look at some tools that I use pretty often in Touch Designer. Sorry if the mic's like blowing up. That I use pretty often in Touch Designer, and I'm going to kind of take a look and show you what that looks like real fast. I just want to make sure I have volume coming through. Yep, sounds like I do. Cool. All right. One time I dropped a stream accidentally because I didn't double check, so that's just what I'm making sure. So today, I think what we're looking at is we're going to look at probably about 4 things inside of Touch Designer. And these are all things that I use a lot and find useful. If you open Touch Designer, you're going to open it to this page that we see right here. Okay, cool, we'll come through. If you open Touch Designer, you're going to open to this page that we see right here, and then this is kind of your start base template. Every time you open this, like, this can almost always be deleted. It's like, I don't know if you've used Blender, but you have the default cube, and the first thing you do every time you open Blender is to delete the default cube. Same thing in Touch Designer, delete your default network. This is cool though, I could just touch on it for a second, because it kind of gives you an idea of a lot of the different parts inside Touch Designer. Like, it gives you a channel, it converts that, into like a channel noise, and then it uses that to displace a texture, a 2D texture, and then it applies that 2D texture to a 3D object. Like, it's pretty interesting. Let's see, is this even attached? Yeah, it is, okay. But anyway, we're going to delete it then. But it is kind of a useful demo and kind of shows you what Touch Designer is about in micro scale. So the things that I wanted to talk about today, let me make this bigger. Things I wanted to talk about today, the first ones are going to be feedback, instancing, projection mapping, and then I was going to do a little bonus thing at the end where I talked about controller support. So the first one, I think we can get into, let's talk about feedback first. And if you're unfamiliar with feedback, basically what we're going to do is we're going to start like we do so many projects. We're going to make a noise. And I'm going to try to do it at its most simple. Let's offset this with a null real fast. Nulls in Touch Designer are useful. They're basically empty objects that have nothing in them. You might ask why that's useful. It doesn't do anything. Well, the idea is that a null can kind of block off sections of your network and then like isolate sections. And it's actually super, super handy if you need to. And because if you need to make changes downstream, like let's say I want to start inserting operators into my network, basically the null can like stop me from relinking everything up every single time. So like relink it. So it's super good to have. What we're going to do is we're going to put this into a feedback, which is what we're going to talk about today. And then we're going to take this and put it into a comp. And comps is short for composite, a composite node. Super useful if you're compositing anything together. I think we can just leave that like this. And then last thing we need to do is say the target top is going to be comp1. And give one more null. Okay. I think it's important to note, hold on, let me open up my side viewer over here. Not my panel. Palette, open palette up here. I think it's important to know that if you look up here, they actually have a feedback kind of default thing that you can play with. Let me see if I can find it real fast. Techniques. Tools. I was looking over here real fast. If I can't find it, that's okay. But there is like a nice like basic setup for that does this kind of thing that kind of just bakes it down already right off the bat. But we don't need it at the moment. Generators, image filters. There it is. Feedback. Okay. So this also kind of talks about what we're doing and kind of what we're playing with here. So if you look in here, you see that they've kind of made a network a lot like ours. Instead of noise, they have a banana. But you can see we have a feedback, a level and over, a wet dry mix, which if you look into it, is just another basic setup that has the custom attributes we use. But this is going to kind of show what feedback is as well. So we'll leave this up here for a second. Real fast. I think I'm going to cut my image on OBS. So bear with me for 1 second. Video capture device. Deactivate. So you're going to miss me for a second, but it's just because I want to bring my image in here in Touch Designer. So we'll say video device in. Okay. Hey, here I am. I'm back with you, just in a different place. Okay. So we'll take this off here, and we're going to actually plug in me to start with. Interesting aspect ratio. Can I change this? Yeah, cool. There we go. A little wider. Okay, this will work a little better. So to start with, we're going to say over on our comp. And we're going to, if you ever get this weird, like squeezed in compressed thing, the reason it's happening is because it's looking at, it has to look at one of your layers in the comp node for the resolution, and it'll be the fixed layer. So what you have here is input 1, input 2. What that refers to is what's coming in here. So my null that has the video feed is, let me close this, is input 1 because it's on top, and my other one is input 2. You can do a couple things to change it. I could move them around like this, but you'll notice if that happens, I've frozen over here. That's because my feedback is now on top. So what we can do instead is just say input 1 is the fixed layer. And then that will put us at the correct resolution. Okay, cool. So we're in here, and I think what we want to do, we can also just change the resolution of our feedback if we need to. Looks like it's fine though now. Okay. So real fast, let's go ahead and turn our feedback on. I don't think we're gonna see anything to start with. Yeah, we're just gonna pause because we're over top. If we turn it on though, real fast, I just want to put it in. Looks like nothing has happened, but the reason for that, yeah, there we go, because we're not actually on. Now we're on. So you see if I pulse this, I'm getting holds. And right now it doesn't look like much, but let me put in a level node right here. I'm going to set this opacity down. Okay, there we go. So let's see if we can kind of tell you what's going on here. Let me move it a little closer. You notice the higher it goes, the more of an after image and trail I leave behind. So you can kind of stop for a second and then move and go from there. And if I turn it down, you can still see that effect. That blur effect is kind of on there, but it's a little less. So what is feedback doing? Just to talk about it for a second. So what feedback is doing is basically drawing the previous frame over top of the new one each time based on the settings that you give it up here. So what that means is right now the feedback, if I have my level up 100%, so it's going to draw that frame and it's just going to leave it on top because then that's the frame that's drawing every time. But if we adjust the opacity, you're going to see that there's a bunch of frames behind it that get drawn, but they're being drawn at 0.929 opacity. So you get this long trail effect, you know, that kind of goes across here. And that's all a result of the feedback. And you can do lots of things with this. So we have this in here. Let's move this over. Basically, we're gonna, to make it effects and changes, we're gonna start sticking things into our feedback network. So let's input a translate, or a transform, I should say in 2D. And right now, we're not doing anything, but let's move it up a little bit. And again, because this is in our feedback loop, in our feedback network, it's going to make some interesting changes. So let's do a very small amount, 0.001. Okay, so that might be too small. Let me see, hold on. Let me turn my opacity back down so you can see this. All right, so if you see, now that I'm in a feedback, it's going to keep pushing my stuff up. And then, I don't know if you can tell, but as I move my hands back and forth, you can see it's going to kind of push them up as it goes along. So you're getting this very cool effect where it's kind of drawing as you go. We're going to move up a little faster. Yeah, something like this. And again, like, so now you can really see, right, like the way my hands are drawing, because again, it's drawing this frame every time. And then if we take out the opacity down a little bit, 0.95, you'll see now that everything's like trailing off of me and you can see me like on here, right? So here are my hands like moving back and forth as we go. And again, they're drawing the frame every time, but again, it's getting, like you can kind of see me on here. Again, it's going down each time, right? Like, so it's drawing it every time at a reduced opacity, and every time that opacity gets a little clearer until it's more and more transparent, the higher it goes. So you can see now we've kind of got this like candle effect going on. And it's important to note that all I have is a camera. Like that's all that's on me right now, just a camera. No fancy equipment or effects. And then I can, really you shouldn't be watching the levels, you should be watching me down here. You see right now, there's like, when I move, there's that little like thing off my fingers and you can see everything's trying to go up, but it doesn't get really obvious until you move this on here. So, cool effect. Cool effect. And then again, this is a pretty cool effect too, where you can draw out whatever is showing on here. So these are just my hands, and I'm just kind of moving them in space. Yep, there you go. All right, so anyway, let's bring us back down a little bit. We can also bypass these if we want. Boop, 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 boop. And turn this off. Okay, cool. So that's one thing you can do, is like make these like cool, you know, like wavy ray trace things in the background. Something else you can do with feedback is you can distort it. So displace it. Displacing distorts as well. So as we add more things, I'm just going to keep making room in my network. Displace, you'll see I get an error. That's because the displace needs a second operator in order for it to work. It does require this displace image. Fortunately, we can just plug this in here. You'll see by default, displace is always way too strong. So you have the displace weight on here. I'm going to put this down to something like 0.01. Even that might be too strong, but let's see. That works. You see, so now the image is being displaced based on this noise. So where it is, I don't know, white or black, I forget which one is doing the displacement. The displacement is stronger, so if I pass through somewhere that has a strong black, I'll displace more. If it's white, I won't displace at all. And then gray will displace me a little bit. So this is interesting, you know, just by itself. Private displace effect. And you can displace with anything. It doesn't have to be a noise. Like I could make a ramp on here. Didn't want my ramp to connect there. Connect my ramp up here. Okay, so I don't know if you see this, but it looks like as you move more towards black, the displace might get stronger. I just want to see. Hard to tell with this. Let me go to a radial one. Yeah, so you can see, this is a good one, like, so right at the edge between the white and black on the radial one, like that stark edge, you see I kind of can like, it just cuts because it's just displacing and it's not a soft gradient, right? It's hard. So you get that like literal like cut in between. So you can see that like anything can be used to displace an image, but for now we'll use noise. Ramp's not the best example for this. So what this looks like with feedback on, we can go and turn these on. It's just basically, it's going to work like an automatic displacement. You see like, because wherever it goes, I kind of wave across. So I get this kind of wavy effect as I move through, but it's really the feedback that gets the effect more than me because I'm being comped over. But the cooler thing happens when you animate your noise. So translate. This is a command you are going to use all the time in Touch Designer if you work with it. So it's good to memorize it. ABS time seconds. So in here, so because you have a feedback loop, right? Like anywhere, so every frame is going to update. So anywhere it updates, you know, you're going to kind of see that displacement. But because it's kind of going over my original one, let's turn up the opacity a little bit on the transform. Go over here. So turn up my opacity, and you can think of opacity as like strengthening the feedback loop. So I get stuff like this, where like my original image is still there, but it, like, you know, everything's being displaced across it. This honestly might be a little strong. We've kind of talked about transform effects. Right now we're just going in the Z. Let's show something else. So if you don't do it, you kind of get this effect, where everything's like wavering, and you can kind of see it. Right now, this might be a little fast for the noise. So if you want to slow it down, basically what it's doing is just animating it, saying we're going to update it every frame or per second. To slow it down, you just multiply it times a smaller number. So times like 0.2 or something. Yeah, that's a little more gentle. Okay. Cool, and then we can do the same with the transform. So we have a scale effect. You can say 0.01, 0.01. I don't know if you can see that. Let me turn the level up a little bit. So yeah, so now it's kind of blowing me up across where I'm going. You see that opacity really changes the effect of how strong the feedback is. So you can kind of find this like happy medium where you're working in, or go way too strong, you know, because this is really like updating every single frame. Okay, we'll bring it back down for a sec. Let's turn that scale even more. And then, like, in some ways I'm just kind of like playing with this right now, but these are all good principles you can use. I think I'm just gonna put this null as my background here and make it easier to see everything. Okay. So we can go up. Yeah, and then you can see, so basically what you're doing at this point is everything's like kind of flying away from you, right? We're getting some pretty harsh stepping on here, so what you can do, hold on. Looks like I just got a error that OBS Studio disconnected, but it looks like I'm still streaming, so we'll stay on with it. Okay. What you can do here is you can take your resolution and you can change the pixel format to something higher, like a 32-bit float, and then get a little bit of a smoother displacement as what you were getting before. Also, something else that you can use to get different effects on this is that you can change your composition settings. So right now we have it set to over, but what if we have it set to something like overlay? Yeah, exactly. Hold on one second. Let's go back to over. I'm gonna build a button real quick. Keyboard in. So something that you can do with a feedback loop is you can pulse it, and basically anytime you hit this, it's gonna reset the feedback loop and kind of draw it from frame 1 again. It's kind of tiring. Sometimes it's good to do this a lot when you're switching composition things. So sometimes that's tiring to do. So another thing we can do is make a button and then put that on here. So right now this is on keyboard in 1. This is pretty fast to do if you've never done this before. Basically we're just going to take this and we're going to put it on the pulse and we're going to say chop reference. So now anytime I hit 1, it's going to do that pulse for me, and I don't have to go back to this node and punch it in each time. And if you're using Touch Designer for the first time, this is a pretty common thing to do, called like referencing. And then the easiest way to do this is find your button, this little viewer active button, click it, and you'll get this highlighted. And you can click and drag this, and you can drag this wherever you want, and you just want to drag it onto the button and say chop reference. And now whenever you hit that, it will pulse it for you. Okay. So real fast, going back to the compositions. But you can see like with the different blending modes, like each one's going to affect it a little differently because it's going to overlay it as it would do. Over is the most basic one because it's literally just taking the image and putting it right on top of the other one, like at whatever transparency it has. But we could do something like multiply too. Yep, and we're just gone. And then that is because we have white colors that are overriding like the whole one. But let's see what else we got. We got probably just go to straight white. Not entirely. Pretty close though. I'm trying to see if we have a good one. Maybe difference. Don't want to give anyone a seizure here, so we'll be careful. I want to think like maximum. Yeah, things like this are good. Where it's like your darks won't actually displace that much because of how they're drawn, but your lights will. So you can get interesting different effects by changing your blending mode. I just want to see what else we got. Pin light, interesting. Things that work with alpha or transparencies give different kind of interesting effects. Let's see, reflect. Looks cool. Not too much here. Linear light. Again, strong alpha burn. Anywhere it's dark, you can see that. Subtractive, yeah. Everything will just go to dark, go to black. Same with subtract, because it's going to take that out of there. I'm just looking to see. Heat, not really. Hard mix. I thought we had some good ones in here, but not seeing too many. Pin light is good if you want to overlay something underneath here. So like with pin light, you could take this and you could take your original, something with a strong alpha like this. You could take your original video file in and you could just composite it back in. So I could grab this, stick this under here, composite, we won't say, we'll say over. And then here you kind of get that effect, but because you have the alpha, right? Like you have the alpha here, that like you kind of get the effect over top of it. You know, so I hope you can see that how that could be pretty cool. You know, like as you move things around. Something else to look at. You know, bypass this for a second and go back to over, but just to show that different blending modes give different results. strong result. Right now where you have scale going on here on the transform, we can also rotate this, like any of these work. Let's go back to one. So we'll turn scale off and we'll go back to this weird displacement. Let's rotate. Oof, too fast. Let's say 1 degree. So like you can kind of see like that swirling where it's kind of taking us down. We can go a little higher. Go a little more. If you turn off displacement, you'll really see it. Yeah, so you see it's kind of like drawing this and it's taking it around each time. If we turn up that opacity, you'll see it even more. So yeah, you'll see like I literally take it into a disk. Take it down just a little bit, and then that just gets stronger and stronger. So it kind of blends more and more of the colors into the wheel. So rotate works too. I think you can change the pivot point too. Yeah, you can move the pivot somewhere else. So you can move the pivot like over to the left side of the screen. And now that's really where, so you get a much stronger rotational effect over here because you're rotating faster on this side, right? So if I move over to this side, see it really pulls off. And again, you can always mess with your levels to kind of fine tune where this effect is. So you get a little darkness from my shirt coming up here. But anyway, just cool effects you can do with feedback. And I've kind of demonstrated this with a camera because it's like the best way to show. You take something familiar and kind of displace it. But it's very fun to mess around with. You can get a lot of cool effects. It's cool to it'll make something fast, like interesting real quickly. Yeah. And you can pulse it each time. Like rapidly pulsing is also fun with feedback. Like move over here. Yeah, there we go. Now I'm right in the middle. Okay. Anyway, let's turn off this rotation. goes back to 0. Pulse to reset. We can just take our level down a little bit. Okay, so now we just have the trails going on. You can barely see them at this point. Yeah, displacement is off as well at this point. So if I turn that on, you can see really swimming underwater. You can also turn down the displacement amount. Like again, our displaced weight is 0.01. We could go 0.005. For displacement, you go real low because it's measuring it as like a fraction of your screen. And so it's just 0 to 1. You know, this side of your screen 0, this side's 1. If you put it 1, it's going to throw you across the screen, you know, like on a pixel per pixel basis, and you don't see anything. So this goes real low because you just want like small fractions of your screen to be what is displaced. And even something like super light like this kind of looks cool, like the wavy like underwater effect. But I think we were done looking at my face for right now. Let's switch over to something like I started with just the noise as a default for feedback. Let's move back into that. Let's get rid of me. So I'm going to delete my face out of here. I'll see if I can bring myself back up in OBS. Activate. All right, should be popping up back in the corner down here. Okay, so I'll disconnect this noise from the null. And move it over here. And start working on our feedback loop this way. We'll bypass this displacement. It's a little much for me seeing all that on the screen, so I think what we're going to do is split our screen like this. We're going to say top viewer. Oops. I almost spent too long on this. I don't. Back to network viewer. I just want to try this real fast. I usually just view it in the background. It just isn't the best viewing experience for me. I'm gonna view it on this side though. So let me close this real fast. Okay. So we have our noise in the background. It's funny because it was still drawing the feedback at the resolution of the camera, but here we go, we can knock it in at this size. Real fast, I want to make my noise a little larger just to get better resolution and quality. We already have 32-bit float. Okay. Make another one down here. Interesting effect. Okay. I'm going to delete this node. I'm just cleaning up my network a little bit before we get started. Okay. So right now our feedback is on, I believe. Yep. So let's talk about some of the effects you can get in here with like things like noise. So a little bit different from just my face, but you can kind of see that the principle is the same. So this is what you kind of get with your displace and is animated. Displace it. I apologize if I'm having some connection issues. It seems like OBS is like kind of stuttering on me, but we'll power through and keep going. So right here, what you're kind of seeing is, if I turn monochrome on, you see it kind of just moves left and right, and that's because you only have one value to work with, right? You have 0 to 1 on all these pixels. So when you do it, you can either move it towards 0, 0, you know, like down here at this side of the screen, or 0, like, you know, like, or 1, 1. So it's up here. So you can go from 0, 0 to 1, 1, and that's it. So you kind of get this like only moving in 2 directions. When you have monochrome, now you're working in all 3 dimensions because you have R, G, and B. So you're displacing in every direction at once. Even even actually in the z-axis, like this pointing at you, although you can't see it because it's transforming. So you get this really cool like liquid paint effect when you use a displace like this. And then basically it's just looking at the boundaries between them. So just kind of showing like, I mean, this is just feedback right here, and then we can apply the same kind of effects, right? Like we can say 0.01, and we can kind of draw it out as we go and displace it this way. We even slow it down more, something like this. So it's still being pulled up, but at a much slower rate. Go back to 0. We can maybe like 0.005, something like this. Yeah, it looks good. We can take something, and again, like it's just the displacement that's doing this. We can always turn this back to monochrome if we want. We can always blend between the two, right? We can go monochrome on, monochrome off. Again, it's going to draw it every single time, you know, as we go through. So just cool things to look at. Other things that we can do is that we can scale or rotate, just like we could before. So if we say like 0.99 on the scale, you're going to get this kind of like shrinking, like pulling in effect, you know, from every side. If we pulse it, it'll go to the center more. It should. Maybe, oh, it's because the pivot's still over here. Yeah, there you go. Shift it back. You can move it around, right? You can move it like, you can move the pivot to 1, you know, over here, shift everything that way. You know, you can move it back here. And again, because we are in Touch Designer, we can do this in real time if we want, right? We can like grab this 0.1, shift it back and forth, you know, like as we go, because nothing needs to be composited, right? We can go fast, we can go slow, things like that. So you get those kind of effects. We can rotate it, you know, at the same time. We can go 1, kind of spin it in as we go around it. So just cool things you can do with feedback, and just kind of to show that if you're making any kind of generative art or generative graphics, feedback is your friend. Again, we're using over, but we could use other colors here and probably get better results than when it was with my face. Cool to see. Average is pretty funny, actually. Yeah, brightest. You'll see that it keeps updating, you know, as brighter colors get pulled in. Just looking right here. Color. Not too much in here because everything's color. Chroma difference, darker color. Looking to see. Ooh. Some of these get real crazy. This dimmest is pretty good. I like this. Again, because you're getting the alpha kind of pushed through. So like only parts of it are kind of staying in the feedback loop, and they kind of move in. So you get kind of this portal effect that you could overlay. Divide. Oof. Real strong colors here. Yeah, same with dodge. Let's look at something like reflect. And kind of again that portal effect where only certain colors are getting pulled in. So you know, just things you can see on here. Go back to over. And then just again, just play around with it. Like the maximum and minimums are really cool. Minimum's probably not as cool, but the maximum is very cool. You know, kind of see that blown out effect. Things like screen. Screen's probably just going to white, yeah. But yeah, very, very cool things to look around with, play around with. Vivid light, same kind of transparent portal effect, pulling it in at the same time. So play around. Again, you can use the level opacity to adjust these as well. You know, if you bring this down, it's going to look a lot different than if it's fully up. Basically, that's how strongly you're applying that feedback. Okay. Go back to our standard over, and then we'll go from there. But at its level, this is actually a very basic feedback loop. You can do things like manipulate things with an LFO. So let's do that real fast. I just want to show. So LFO, just going to fluctuate back and forth between a value. We could put this to a mouth, and instead of 0 to 1, let's see what's our scale value at 0.99. We could say 0 to 1. We could say 0.99. 0.92. I don't know. Some of these might be like too strong or too weak. Let's say like 0.92. This might be way too hard. It's funny because it like looks like nothing. Let's say null off of here. And then we can put this on the transform node as on the scale. So check this out. Again, if you want to reference something, turn the viewer on, drag it over, chop reference. Yeah, that's very strong. Like I say, you don't know. But move this one over to chop reference. So like again, you're like pushing it back and forth, right? Like it's alternating with it. We can always adjust that on the math node, right? We can put this back to 0.97 or something and make it less strong. So you get that scale like coming in, and you could set this to like a beat. You know, you could make this audio reactive as like it like pulses through and stuff like this. So if you're interested in making, you know, kind of generative 2D graphics, check out feedback because you can do a lot of stuff with it. I think we're gonna put this back to 0.99. Oops. Go to tab. Alright, cool. Calm that down a little bit. But it kind of like can show you what you can do, right, with these graphics as you go. Yeah, channel mix red blue. Yeah, unveil in the chat. Just to mention that there's a ton of things. Yeah, you can do things like with like I don't want to get too into it because I'm doing like simple things, but you can do things like limits too, which are pretty fun. You clamp these down. Like it's always fun to mess with like the limits in a feedback loop too. So like the value can only go so high or so low. Yeah, like you said. Oh yeah, slope is also a great one. Let's see. Put it in. Because you can kind of set it. Wasn't ready real fast. Turn it down real low. Anyway, sorry, I'm getting off book right here. But again, like there's tons of effects you should play with, and then play with like all kinds of things on here when you're looking to mix feedback. Just keep it in mind, keep it in your back pocket. Like for generative art, it's super good, especially for generative 2D art. I think I'm gonna close this one out real fast. Let's talk about instancing. Kind of do my little segue here. From here, basically what we want to do is we want to make a network. All right, and then let me talk about what instancing is. And I'll try to explain it like as I'm setting stuff up. So instancing relates to geometry, like at the end. So the 3D stuff inside of Touch Designer is kind of what you're going to be doing in here with instancing. So as I go in, basically, let's just set up a box as our base. We'll do double boxes because I think this will make it easier to kind of understand. So at its level, and then we're going to do a transform, and then we'll say a null in case we want to change it further down the line. Again, use nulls to offset your networks. It'll make things much easier. And then we're going to do another box. And we're just going to connect this one to a geometry. Okay. So geometry right in here. So what is this going to do? We'll talk about. I think the easiest thing to start with is just to kind of show you. So let me turn this on real fast so you can see the wireframe. So here's our box. It's pretty simple. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 points on it. If you want to check that out, you can look at it on here. 24 points, I should say. The reason for this is the way Touch Designer has it is that it's not merging the points together on the box. They're actually separate, so you could pull them away. So each one of these corners or vertices is a pair of 3 points, right? So 8 times 3 is 24 because you basically have the point from this polygon on here, the point from this polygon here, and the point from this polygon on here, which is why this says 24 points because 8 times 3. But it doesn't matter too much because they're right on top of each other for our purposes. But what we can say is we can turn on some divisions here. So now you can kind of see the wireframe for this box, how it's divided up. We can make this a little higher, not too high, just a little bit. So we have this kind of cube in between that's kind of controlling it. What we can do here, I'm going to put a transform in here too, is that we can use this to create mini copies of this object in here as kind of a lattice or a guide. So to do that, you go to instance in the geometry node, we can make it a little bigger, and then you want to turn instancing on. You can leave these alone, but basically these are all factors that you can control and mess with inside while you're instancing. So we'll say null one. And then when you say that, it'll do nothing. And the reason for that is it's looking for you to input parameters from the operators that you're using. So in this case, we're using operator null1 to control the placement of these boxes. So what I'm going to do here is jump in and say 0.0, 0.1, 0.2, and this is the XYZ. And if you look, it looks like not much has changed. It looks like we still just have a cube here. Well, the reason for that is because everything's too big right now. So basically, a cube has been put in each time at each of these locations, but it's the original height that we had. So they're all actually inside each other. So we need to make these cubes way smaller. So I'm gonna go down here, keep going, keep shrinking, keep going. I'm not exactly sure when the break point will be, so I'm just kind of there it is. And this is what you actually have at this point. So you see we have this network and grid of cubes that's location is based on the points that we've set up in here. So this is cool and interesting. I mean, it's like a way to make a lot of copies of something if you need it, but maybe like the practical applications are, you're like, well, what do you use this for besides making lots of copies of stuff? Well, the interesting thing comes from the fact that you can make visualizations and data visualizations using instancing from a number of sources. Almost anything can be used as kind of the guide for an instance. So you notice you have translate operators. You don't have SOPs, right, or TOPs, because you can use any of these to control an instance. And I'm going to kind of show what that looks like in a lot of places. First off, though, anything that you do to deform the cage will deform each of these points. So just a cool application real fast. If I apply a noise to this, you'll see that all of these points are going to start moving in tandem with each other as well. So I'm going to do something like this. Kind of bring it across. I'm going to bring this period in a little bit, I think. But yeah, you can kind of see how they're moving here. And again, it's all dependent on how this cage is deforming. So again, you can see that you can get some interesting animation and stuff with this, but it doesn't have to deform off of this. So let me just take that out for a second. Back to our structured cage. You'll see something interesting if you put a noise in here. So it's funny because the way it deforms. So now it's deforming each of these individually. It's funny because this only has like a few faces. Let's add some divisions to these. Not too many, because again, we're recreating this like hundreds of times over. But if you put in the divisions here, you can see them kind of all morphing and changing. We're going to change that period to be real low, because right now it's deforming quite a bit. Very cool. And then you could put these on top of each other. But again, you just remember which one you're deforming. If you're deforming this top one here, you're deforming the cage, that controls the placement of them, but the boxes are the same. If you're deforming them here, you're deforming the actual units, but the cage is staying the same. So just remember how to think about it, but we'll take that out. It's interesting that they're showing like the divisions right here. I guess if you use the divisions, they have to show up. All right, but we'll go back. Okay, and then again, this doesn't have to be boxes or like any, again, we're in Touch Designer. Anything can be used to control anything. So instead of a box, I could take this out and put in a cylinder or a sphere, I guess I should say, or a cylinder, doesn't matter. We'll say a sphere though. So now we have a bunch of spheres instead of a bunch of boxes. And if you deformed it with noise, it would react in much the same way. And if you've watched my videos and stuff, you've probably seen me do this before with things. We're going to take a little bit more of an in-depth dive into it today because I want to kind of show you how you can work with it and make it work for you. Now, this is all well and good. Like, this is interesting, but you can use it in other senses too. So we have a top. We have our friendly noise that we've used last time, and we're going to do the same thing here. So we'll say null, and we're going to change this to null too. And it's going to give me an error, and the reason for that is we're not using points anymore, we're using pixels. So what we're going to do is change this, just get rid of these, slowing down my system. So I can put R, G, B. Well, it didn't do anything. What is this? This isn't what I want. Well, the reason for that is because why it's not doing anything is because, again, you only have one value here. You have 0 to 1. That's what you're using. So you're just placing everything somewhere along 0 to 1 in a 3D axis, so you're just making a line, because we probably have every value from 0 to 1 on here. It's slowing down my system because it's based on the resolution, and 256 by 256 is actually a lot. So let's go with something like 40 by 40, so we don't like destroy the render right here, the real time. Okay, so now we're back. Yeah, so I'm not even sure what 256 squared is. It's a lot. So we'll put it down to something more manageable. You can also actually see, like if you just go into your resolution and hit the I button, you can see, okay, 40 by 40, 1600 pixels, right? So 256 by 256 would be more than that. But if we change this from monochrome, suddenly we have 3 dimensions to work in. Now, I will say that there are 3 dimensions that are all still 0 to 1. So you see that we're pretty constrained. You can see we kind of have the dimensions inside our grid here. Let me zoom in a little bit so you can see. We have our dimensions in here. So everything's still being constrained in the 0 to 1 range. But we don't have to. What we could do is we could put in a math node in here, in between them, and we could put range from 0 to 1, 0 to 20. Whoa, why did it do that? I actually know this one. This isn't an accident. I put it in as a trap. So right now, if we look at the noise we're generating, if you go back in here, you can look at the pixel format. By default, we're using 8-bit fixed RGBA values. These are not enough to actually hold all the number information we need. So if you go into the math node where everything's like all blown out, and you right click and you say display pixel values, you're gonna see that we can only go up to 255, right? Like RGB 255 and 0 to 1, so R, G, and B. So basically we have things where they're all pushed out to the edge here because these are just like the 1 values. So you've got 1, 1, 1. Sometimes you get like a 1, 0, 1 or something like that if there just is nothing in the value. So everything gets pushed to the edge. So how do we get around that? Well, we change the pixel format to 32-bit float. And then all of a sudden, we have a world of possibilities at our fingertips. So this is way too spread out. But if you look in here, look at the same values that used to be 0 to 1. You now have R values of 7, values of G values of 12, B values of 14. So you can see how it gets pushed out. And then we can adjust this as needed to the math range. So we have 0 to 20, we can go 0 to 10, kind of shrink things in a bit. Because we have more space now, we can go into our transforms and make our spheres bigger. So we can enlarge them. You'll notice that everything is mostly, I think it might be, yeah, everything is kind of contained into those values. You don't have stuff like really going into the negatives, outside of maybe some exceptions. But you can see that we kind of have all this moving around in this way. So now you are controlling basically this instance via a texture. And this is cool for a lot of reasons. It's like, one, you're not restricted to geometry. You can actually use photos to visualize what this looks like. And I want to see real fast, like let's show some cool things. So again, we can animate this, first cool thing. Well, it's pretty fast still. I did it at times 0.2. You can slow things down. So you can animate all these, move it around. Use that for your render. Because as they move, the position is going to move, like the RG and B values are going to change and update. So you see everything's kind of moving pretty slowly through there, but it is moving in space. You can sync this to music or something like that, but we'll get back to that in a second. So you can use these in conjunction with one another. So that'll be kind of the next thing I talk about when I talk about instancing, just to kind of show that you can use these together. All right, so that's just basically using texture information to displace and make instancing. So we'll cut that. Cut this off. Again, these are just the base examples here. And let's go and grab a chop. Let's grab some channel info. Let's say a noise maybe. Put it up to a null. Transform. So with channels, you have X and Y. I think we want to transform this on the X. Translate. Yeah, very slow. That's always what you want. That might be fine. You do times like 50 or something. You'll really see it move. So let's just start with this here and see what we get. So we have null 3. So the other ones we've gotten have been point locations and normal locations for the SOPs, for the boxes we could use to control it. Oh man, no, they're up here, okay. For the tops, we could use the RGB values of it. What do you think we're gonna get for channel operators? Let me take a look and see. Well, basically it's gonna be the channels themselves. Let's see if I can scale this down some. Yeah, that's moving very quickly, so we can move it down. Slow this back down. You see, they're kind of like oscillating back and forth. And the reason for that is right now you have one channel value and it's putting the location everywhere on this line as it updates. So how do we get around this? We need more channel values if we want to do a 360. So we can grab a different noise, make sure you change the seed. Actually, let's just recreate it because then I don't need to change the animation. We'll change the seed on it though. And what we're going to do is we're going to merge them together. And this merging actually is pretty important, but we'll talk about it in a second. So we can disconnect this, get an error, and put these two in now. And now we can connect. Now you see before we had channel 1, now we have channel 1 and channel 2. If you do this, now we have a two-dimensional depiction of every point on here. Oops. Let me home. There we go. And you see this is kind of beautiful. And it's kind of a depiction of where the 2 points would intersect based on where it is. So you have 0 to -5, -5 to +5. And they're just kind of moving along in the progression of where the channel would go. So, again, we can add more. We can add another one. So let's add another noise. We'll set the seed different. And we'll merge it together. And now, we can take that and now we have a third channel that we can use to control. And now we have something truly three-dimensional that you can use to control the movement. And if you see, this point at the end is where it's being updated from. We can make changes to all these, like we could change the amplitude. It's going to stretch the things out on one axis, on whatever axis we adjust it to. We can change the period, which is basically going to give us a fully new x-axis. That's kind of what it is. Exponent, again, is going to kind of like flatten or amplify it. but it is cool to watch him move through that zone. So you see just basically how you use them together, you're going to get like a different look every time. And that's kind of how you can use channel operators to control instancing, is that whichever channels you send in are going to be what you can use to control it. And right now, I mean, like, I think we might have done ourselves a disservice because we're only looking at translate, but we can, again, change these to rotation, scale. There is a whole nother page of instancing that relates to point towards, rotate to vector. So you have like an object in the middle, they'll all point towards that vector. Texture, you can apply textures to your instances, so you can change the color of each of these. Just to say, maybe real fast we'll add a scale, just because it's easy to add another noise. We just basically merge it in. We'll say the fourth one. Change the seed, and then for the scale OP we can say null 3, and then maybe all 3. We just put them all in, say chan 4. We might make the amplitude on this one a little bigger. Offset this one this way. There we go. And again, you see now we can affect the scale in this way. So beautiful. Like, I mean, they're beautiful. Like, you can make really cool like objects in this way. But what's important, I think, to show you, and what I wanted to kind of show, is that you can use all of these together too. And this is what I really kind of wanted to get to, because when I figured this out with instancing, it kind of blew my mind. So again, you don't have to just use channels or just use SOPs or just use tops to generate instancing. Oh, something real fast. You can also use DATs. Like, you can use a DAT too. Like, I can put it in a table. And this is what's really good for data visualization. Like, if you're using Touch Designer for data viz, you can put all your values in a table and then instance these as a, like, on the X or Y, right? Because you have a grid here. So you can put, like, you can plot your X against the Y and do a traditional graph. If you have 3 data sets, you can plot it in 3 dimensions, you know, pretty easily. You can just basically make a grid, you know, with your SOPs, and then just put it as a bar graph or something, you know, just change the scale. So you can do this as well. I don't have a good data set to pull, and I don't want to bore you by typing in a bunch of random numbers, but just to show what that would look like is I could pull null 4 instead. It probably needs more info. Oh yeah, no, it needs to get rid of these. Yep. So what you're going to pull from instead, I'm just going to take these out real fast, is you're going to basically pull from rows, and we just don't have that many at the moment, but you would pull from rows in the table instead, and you can generate instances that way. Go through. Again, like, I would always import a table here. I wouldn't do it this way, but it kind of shows you like where you can generate things from. Yeah, and you see, you can pull from basically the rows and columns. So now, like, the 0 is like my header, and if I added another column, so let's add another column, and we'll say like 3.3. So now if you look in, now we have the option to go from 0.25 or 0.33, and it will basically pull all the values in that row or column and put them in your instance. And this is where it gets really good for data viz. This is where you really want it for data viz, because you can just pull in these huge tables of data and then make your visualization just by pulling the data in as an instance. And this might be worth a video on its own right. I have been meaning to do like a Touch Designer for data viz at some point, but haven't gotten around to it yet, but that's a really great way to use instancing. So what I wanted to say here is that you can use these in conjunction with each other. So let's say I want one of these channels combined with this grid, like with the position of the top, and you can use all of that together. So basically all you need to do is convert everything into chops. And that's the kind of route we'll show here and like kind of what that looks like. So real fast. I think I'm going to go to a grid. It'll just be easier at the end of the day. So we'll put a grid out here. Easier to visualize. So 20 by 20, just because the pixels like work how you think they would with a grid. So, oops, convert this to a wireframe. Whoops, wrong. No, this is right. Okay, so we got our grid going. Okay, so let's say I want to use like the X and Y here of this grid to lay everything out, but then I want to use something different. So how does that work? So what we do here is what you want to do is you want to take this and you can convert it SOP to CHOP. And what that's going to show you is you have the TX, TY, and TZ values of your whole grid basically set up as 3 CHOP channels. And if we go here, you can kind of see what that looks like. So we have 3,600 points. And if you look here, we have 3,600 as our range on our CHOP. And it's kind of putting them out each way. So if you go on the X value, just to visualize it, you're going to go, so the whole table is set from negative 0.5 to positive 0.5. You can see that on here if you look at it. Let's move it out. So here's 1. So you have negative 0.5 to positive 0.5. So that's your value. And then every X row, you're going across the X for rows 60 times. So you're going from 0 to 60 here, or 0 to 59, and then you're dropping back down immediately and going 0 to 59, and then dropping straight down and going 0 to 59 over and over again. And then the Y is incrementing every 60 rows. So every 60 times you go down the next row, go down the next row, down the next row. And that's how it's being plotted. And then the Z is doing nothing because, again, it's a 2D object with the grid. So it's just staying flat. But then this is plotting all of that on here. So let's say that we want to use this to set up our network. Whoops, we'll say null. And we'll just grab that and throw it into our instance. So we're going to null form, cool. And we're going to say X and Y are good, TX and TY. So now we have our grid, our instance grid. But let's say we want them to do something. Let's say we want them to jump up and down, you know, like come out of the wall at us. And we can use a top to control that. I think we'll stick to tops and SOPs together because we're already in channels, because we're converting to. So all I would do to do that is I would find 60 by 60. So I want to go here to my resolution, 60 by 60. And because we're only working in one channel, again, we can be in monochrome, but we don't need to be because we're only controlling the Z, so 0 to 1. That's all we need. If we were doing 3 dimensions or more, we would need more, but we don't. So we can convert this to monochrome if we want. I'm going to take the math out of here for a second, and then I'm going to convert this one too. So we're going to convert this top to CHOP, just like this. And now we have R, G, and B, and they're all the exact same because, again, we're in monochrome. If we turn this off, you'll notice now they're all different because we have different values. But we can just grab the same one for this. So what we would do here is, again, because we were, whoops, I'll try this off for a second. Because we were smart, we ended this in a null, so we can go through and make changes. So I could put this in here, and I can insert an operator, and I can say select. And a select chop, what's it do is we say, okay, what chops do we want to grab? And we want to grab TX and TY. So we've taken out the TZ. And then what we can do here is grab this one, and we can rename it. Actually, let's do the select here as well, because we only need one channel, right? We only need one channel. So we'll say select. And we can grab any of these that aren't the alpha. So we'll just grab R. It's one up top. And then we're going to take this and we're going to rename it. I don't actually know if we have to rename it. I actually don't think we need to. It makes sense because you can call it TZ for here, but let's just leave it alone for a second. And then we can come in here and we can just say insert operator merge. And this is it at a basic level. Like, this is about as basic as you can get with mixing networks. And now what we have, you see, is we have this R value coming in here. One thing I forgot, you need to look at the cropping. Right now, the cropping is only looking at the rows. So you notice that we only have a very small amount of data compared to the rest because it's basically we only have 60 You see like 0 to 60 right here, 0 to 60 right here. Same on the same thing, because it's cropping out everything else. So in order to get that data, instead of going to the crop, we'll go rows and columns, or the full image. I think they'll do about the same thing. Oh yeah. And then if we go to rows and columns, you'll see that we have all like 3,600 channels in here, because basically it's showing them for every picture. Every single pixel is going R0, R1, you know, R2. So that's too many. So there's one more step that we need to do, and it is a reorder. And we go to the paddle. Channel reorder method. Oh, sorry, not reorder. I'm getting ahead of myself. It's a shuffle. Sorry, just coming to. And what the shuffle is going to do is it's going to sequence everything by a certain pattern. And what we want to say is we want to sequence all samples by name, because they're all going to have kind of the same name in here. So we say sequence all samples, samples by name, and then we get this up and down for everything. And if you look, it should be about the same. I'm going to say full image though. Yep. So for the full image, we have the whole thing, and then you see now that we have the same amount of channels. So this is important, and you'll see why in a second. So again, we have our grid on here. And now what we've done is we've converted this into a chop. We have arranged the data so it can work with it. We've merged them together, and now we can use both together. So translate Z. You see, we can use this R value. And now basically what this is we have the grid, but we've exploded it out. And I actually want to go to a smaller amount so you can kind of see what's going on. So I am going to put a math in here. So we're just going to kind of bring it back down. So range 0 to 1. We're going to kind of shrink it in. There we go. Okay. So you see, basically, since we're using R, it might be easier if we look at it on the R. Hold on. Point one. There we go. So basically what we did, it's funny to look at it this way, is we went in, let's just do it with all these. I think it makes it easier to see. 0.1, 0.1. Okay. So I think this makes it easier to see. So basically what we've done, I'll just take one in here, is we are now using the white and black values to control the height on here of this image. You see that there's this animation going on. It's still animating very slowly. We can actually turn that up a little bit. You can see the movement. Okay. And it's displacing on just the z-axis based on what the value of the pixel is. And because we have the same number of pixels as we do the channels, it works because each one is assigned to a different value. So real fast, just to kind of show, if we change the resolution, like if I put this to 70, hold on, I'll see if I can get a good look. Maybe if I move it like down real low. Yeah, down here in the corner, look down here. You see it doesn't know what to do with the rest of these because they're just being applied to the end, so it's just stacking them right on top of each other. So if we go like 100, again, they just get stacked down here. If you go less, let me move back so you can see. You see it works up to here, and then it's like, well, the rest of them aren't doing anything, right? Because you don't have any more information. So it just says, okay, like we'll apply it, you know, for the starting at 0, 0 and coming down. We'll apply it, but then for the rest of them, I'll move in. For the rest of them, we're not going to do anything, you know, because it's just flat through the rest. So it's important to note that your resolution like matches up with the number of samples. And there's a number of ways you can do that. Again, you can use math, you can resample them. So I want to see if I can do that here actually. So let me start an operator. We'll say resample. Not this one. slice off. I want to resample new rate. Same rate, new interval. Yep. So here we go. So we can basically like take them out further, and if you look, as we do this, we're extending the interval that we're using on here. So 0 to 10. So I was just seeing certain things. 600. Just add it on. 1600. And you see, because it doesn't have all the data it needs, like it's kind of stretching them out, which is why you get this kind of banding effect on here. Because it doesn't have like a one-to-one data range. So it's like taking the data it does have and like averaging it, like stretching it out. So when you do resample, just note that because you don't have enough information, it's not going to be like perfect like it was before. But you can resample and change it. You can also use math nodes to try and boost it up. But again, the easiest way to do that is just match your resolution. And if you're working with generative stuff, there's no reason not to do it because you can change your resolution to whatever you want it to be. So cool. This was a quick overview on instancing and like changing things and kind of showing how you could change these to chops and merge them together to use things from both sops and tops, or chops and sops, or chops and tops to make your instances. So hopefully this wasn't too like numbing, you know, at the time, but it is helpful, and it was good for me to learn this, you know, and kind of mess around when I was seeing it, because I was a little confused about like how to transfer between the data types and how you could use them together to make an instance. Again, and if you're using one to control each one, like there's no reason you couldn't like put a top in your translate and a chop in your rotate. You know, you can always mess with those and see what you get. But just to show, I think the next thing we're going to get into might take a little bit of setup, so bear with me as I go through. But basically, I wanted to cover some quick projection mapping stuff. This is like one where I just kind of jump around on things I haven't covered before. And projection mapping is a super cool process that I use a lot kind of when I'm doing stuff, but I haven't done really any information on it. So what I'm going to try to do here is I think I'm actually going to jump out of OBS and I'm going to use my camera inside of Touch Designer because then I can move it around and stuff. So let me swap my settings real fast, deactivate. I'll see you in a second inside of Touch. Video device in. Here I am. Okay. So this both lets me see what I'm doing and also will let me focus the camera better when I'm like going on to things that are important. So you see in my background here, I have, let me just grab one. I have these pretty simple, I guess like shapes. All they are is laser cut that they've been wood glued. They have like a brace on the back and it's just wood that's been spray painted white. And all they're serving as is a good like surface to reflect and project on. So they're all within the bounds of my projector, which I have set up to the side. And I'm going to kind of show what projection mapping is and what you would use it for in Touch Designer and kind of one process to go about it. So the first thing that if you're projection mapping, it's just good to know what it is. Projection mapping is the process of masking or distorting objects so that they fit onto a non-uniform surface. You know, because if you have a screen the same resolution as your projection or your projector, then it works really well. But if you want to project onto something a little weirder, then it takes a little more work. I'm going to show you kind of a more basic means of projection mapping. Not the most basic, but something that works best with 2D shapes, because that's what I have back here. If there's interest in projection mapping and kind of showing how to do it inside of Touch Designer, I'll projection map something more complicated, like a 3D like object. You know, that's not just a square or not just a flat surface. But we'll start with this one real fast. Okay, so what I'm going to go do here is you actually have to jump into your palette for this. And the mapper I'm going to use today is the Cantan mapper. And you can find this all under mapping. And any projection mapping tools that you'll use inside of Touch Designer that aren't just basic operators are all going to be found here under mapping in the palette. So we'll use Cantan mapper. Okay, I'm just going to drag it out. Hopefully it doesn't crash anything. And what the Cantan mapper is it's just a tool that's been set up. If you've used Touch before, you know that we have just these containers that have been pre-built by Derivative that lets you basically access things within. So if you click inside, you can kind of see all the stuff that built it. Lots of things, lots of code that they write and things like that. Lots of other containers. It gets more complicated. Just seeing if, yeah, it gets more complicated as you go down. So if you're interested in how tools are built inside of Touch Designer, I encourage you to jump into the palette and then see how they put together some of these things. So real fast, this works best if you have like 2 monitors, but you don't have to by any means. But basically this is the palette we're going to be working in. So for the start, you can say open Cantan window. This will pop up and this will basically be what you use to work inside of Touch Designer. I need something to project onto my thing, so I'm just going to make a quick noise. So I'm going to push this down here for a second. We'll turn monochrome off. We have something colorful. We'll animate it because that looks nice. Always animating noise. ABS time, about seconds. Again, please memorize this if you're going to be working with Touch Designer because you'll use it all the time. And then we can change our settings a little bit if we wanted to, but not necessary. You know, whatever you want. Yeah, and that's fine. Do your harmonics. You get into tweaking noise all day. Anyway, we'll leave that alone for now because we just need some kind of texture to project is really all we need. And again, when I talk about projecting textures, you do projection mapping with tops most commonly, like tops or what you kind of use. So let's bring up our window that we used with. And by default, when we go to projection map something, we're going to need some kind of mask or some kind of tool. So what I usually do is I make a quad. Just click and drag, and it doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just dragging something out. One thing I want to do before I set is that this is going to be mapped to these things behind me, but before that I need to make sure that I'm outputting the results to my projector. So to do that, you go to Window Options, and I see we have Monitor 0. Right now I have 2 monitors. One is the computer monitor in front of me, and one is the projection behind me. So I'm going to put it out to Monitor 1. We'll say Monitor 1. I think we're good to go. Sorry, 1 second. It's complicated when you have this many windows open. Close. Okay, I'll come back here. All right, cool. So just need to make sure. So I think we're good. I might have to jump into my device settings just to make sure. So 1. Sure, my Cantan window is up. Whoops. Open Cantan. Okay, there we go. And we want to toggle the output. Okay, that's what I was looking for. Let me get the lights real fast because it'll be easier to see. All right, cool. Now here is what we want to find and want to see. So you'll notice that we have a little bit of bleed up here, and that's because I'm using the non-commercial version of Touch Designer that can output as a 1280 by 720, but it can't go higher than that. That's kind of the restriction that you place on yourself by using the non-commercial version. I can modify that in my device settings. So like, hold on 1 sec. My display settings. So I can say that the other monitor I'm using is 1280 by 720. Yep, and there we go. I don't know if you can see it, but let me go back. Keep the changes. Jump back in. All right, and now you see that I've gotten rid of that because I changed the resolution of the projector to 1280 by 720. So no more overbleed, no more bleed. So now what you see is like, you can see back behind me that I have this laid out. Wherever my mouse goes, you see I have this little crosshair. And what I can use is this will help me figure out where I need to put my edges. So if you look at the middle one, well, we'll put this on the side. So you look at the side one right here, you can see I'm running up and down. So I can pinpoint where I want to put the item I'm mapping. So real fast, we're just going to start mapping this one to this edge right here. And I'm just going to do the ballpark to start with, because you can go back in and fine tune. In fact, I'd encourage you to go back in and fine tune. So I can put these in here, and I'll put a little bit inside. And this is all built into Touch Designer, and it's something Touch Designer is good at. All right, so now if I wanted to fine tune, you can see I've mapped this quad to this middle one back here. And I can use my arrow keys after I select the point, and I can really fine tune it and get it exactly where it needs to be. So, real fast, just cleaning it up a bit. And this is a pretty fast process. Although keep in mind you don't move your projector or what you're projecting on, because you will have to recalibrate it. You know, you can kind of eyeball it and get it pretty close, but again, if you want it to look good, you'll need to come back and tweak the points again to get it. So that's one quad. And then I could go ahead and make another one. I can do this anywhere. So I can just kind of come up here, and you can notice that I can do it in the background here too, right? Because I can see where my mouse is. So I can come back here and say, okay, I can start drawing about here, and I can pull this down as I go. And again, you notice how it's like a little distorted on the back there, and that's because the camera and the projector and the surface I'm projecting on are not parallel. So you're always going to get a little distortion. But that's fine, because that's why you're doing it here, because you can correct the distortion as you go. And then I can do the exact same thing to map this one. So just get it in the right ballpark. Okay. And I'd encourage you, if you haven't thought about projection mapping, is to just think about places you can use it, because it's super useful and it's super cool if you do a presentation and you do like some kind of non-standard display surface. Again, like especially if like you have a booth or something and someone's coming by, like you can really impress people like just by doing a very simple projection map, like when something inside Touch Designer. So I'm just going to go ahead and come in, clean up my corners a little bit. Looks good. Come down here. This one already looks pretty good, but we should. And clean it up down here. All right, that looks pretty great. So basically we'll start with these for now. I don't think we need to map the last one, just because you get the idea, right? We're drawing quads and we're mapping them to things. What I can do now is I can apply a texture to it. So to do that, basically I go in here to edit texture, and I can grab a texture from within Touch Designer. So I have this null one. So I can type in here, null one. And you're not going to see anything, but that's kind of a given. So we're going to set that as okay. And you notice that you have this little flag right here that right now is an X. Sorry, I'm just making sure that this lines up. Say null one. Making sure, I might need to reference it more explicitly. Let's see, edit the texture. You can just drag it on too. The thing I'm wondering is if you need to, yeah, okay. So you do need to set it from the root. So you need to say project one, null one. Okay, but we're good from this point. We'll say okay. And now that that's in right, I can hit this. And if you look behind me, let me go in here, you see that I am mapped the texture, you know, back to the display back here. And what I can do is the same thing for this one too. So I can take this one, rectangle 3, or rectangle 1, rectangle 2, edit texture. I can grab the same one too, that's totally fine. I can just drag it on here, texture, project 1, null 1. I'll say OK. And then click the visibility, and now I have both textures mapped. So behind me, you can see that I've mapped them to the board. They're still there, they're a projection, but we've modified it and made it so that like it's got the graphics that we want to display. If you're having trouble seeing it, hold on one second. We can take care of this. Insert operator, level. Just bring the brightness down. Yep. And then you can kind of see like that we have it. You see that we have a little bit of bleed in the back. Again, that's easy to fix. Basically what you would do is come back to your window, find the edges that are bleeding, and you can do that by kind of just mousing over them. So it looks like these are the ones that are going over the edge, and you can just bring them down. Until you can't see the bleed anymore. And then this is kind of how I do it when I map something as well, is I'm like, all right, where's the bleed, you know, where's the white space on the board, and then I can get it to like a pixel perfect size by looking at it. You can see I got a little small amount of bleed on it right now, but overall looks really good. And then boom, the bleed's gone because I calibrated it correctly and adjusted it to where it needed to be. So this is the Cantan mapper inside of Touch Designer. There are many other ways to projection map things inside Touch Designer, and each one has its own pros and cons depending on what you need, kind of what you need to map and what you need to set up. So this one is really good for anything that's kind of like a flat surface. Any shape is fine. I just did a quad here, but you can draw like a freeform. So if I had like a cloud cutout or something like that, or a specific shape, I could come in here and I could start drawing these with Bezier handlers, like Bezier curves, like you can see on here. And then I could make the shape that way. So it doesn't have to be like, a square, you know, like a quad. Like that's not required at all. That's just, you know, like what I chose to draw at this point. So from here, like if I wanted to project this onto this other board right here, I could. I would just have to move that out. I don't know if you can see it like on my screen, but as I stick it off, it comes onto the other monitor, you know, because I'm using my two monitor setup. One's a projector. But then I could like map this shape, you know, onto here as well. And then once I apply, again, same thing, just edit the texture. Freeform 4, edit texture. Grab this, oop, not that one, that's my level. Grab this, just throw it in there. Turn on the view, and you know, see, now you can see the same kind of thing that I displayed it, you know, but it's this cutout shape. And again, like if it was an actual shape, like I would map it to the shape that I had, not just the cutout. So hopefully you can kind of see that, see how everything's working, you know, in here, and like you'd be interested in maybe thinking about the possibilities of how you can texture map something, you know, as you go. And it's very easy inside of Touch Designer. Like they make it easy to do, and I've had a lot of fun with it and playing with it. So cool. Just wanted to do a quick showcase on that if you're looking to make projection map content for something. And again, this is just a Touch Designer perform window, you know, so you can make it interactive. You can do whatever you want on it. I could leave this up and we could like do something in the next part, you know, that kind of showcases what you could do with it and making it interactive too. So maybe I'll do that. I might turn the lights on for a second though, because I want to showcase other things first, but we can leave this up and running. So give me 1 second to switch the lights back on. We're still rendering out. That's kind of visible. Turn my levels back up. Close the Cantan mapper. And again, as long as you have the Cantan mapper up and running, like you can just throw this somewhere like off to the side in your scene and not worry about it. Oh, another cool thing you can do with this that I would be remiss if I didn't mention is that you notice that how when you put these things in, it's kind of deformed. like the layouts are not exactly, because again, your projector's not at a perfect perpendicular angle where they would just be like, you know, if they're flush, then it would just look exactly like it did, but they're not, right? Like they're leaning a little bit, they're skewed to the side. So if you want to design something, you know, to be projected on here, a good way to do it is to, forget which one is the output, but we'll look at both. Yep, just like this. So if you grab a null out, I just want to see what the bottom one is. Okay, grab the top one. If you grab a null out, it's actually going to go ahead and make a mask for you. And then what you can do with this is that if you go into here, let me move myself back over so you can see me while I talk. So if you go into here, what you can do is you can, let me open my window real fast. If you go back into your Cantan window, you can turn the textures off like this, right? So we just switch them off and we go back to these default colors. If you switch them off, that's going to update here. And what you can do is you can take this and you can save it. Let me, Cantan mapper, this one. Let me just get off that. Okay, cool. So now what you can do is just go here to save image. And you can save this out, like at the same resolution that you're going to be working at, and then you just have a mask. Like it's just made a mask for you that has been skewed, you know, to the correct, like it's skewed it correctly to whatever you're mapping. So as long as you don't move your stuff in the background or move your projector, you have a perfect mask that you've made, and then you can just draw or animate or do whatever you want to do it on inside a graphics editing program like Photoshop or After Effects or something. And then you already have the perfect map to work in. So it'll look correct, you know, on your map because you have based it off of the mask. So that is something cool to do too. Just know that you can generate masks out of here. Real fast, let me open my Cantan window. I'm just gonna turn the stuff back on because it looks cool. I gotta get these views somehow, right? Texture, texture, and texture. Okay. Cool. So we can leave that up in the background, and like I said, it just looks nice. Close out of here. All right. So the last thing I wanted to talk about is I've talked a lot about inputs inside of Touch Designer. So like these are different inputs that you can take. I've done MIDI controllers, I've done Leap Motion controllers, I've done Arduinos, I've done all kinds of stuff. But depth cameras, like Touch Designer will take all kinds of sensors. But something else Touch Designer will take is something that lots of people probably have around somewhere is game controllers, like game pads. You can use it, and it's very easy to work with inside Touch Designer using them. So I wanted just to kind of show kind of a little bit what that looks like. So real fast, and just how you can use like kind of game controls to control stuff inside of Touch Designer, inside of Touch, because it's very easy, and it's very easy to get set up quickly. So just plugging in real fast. Hopefully my computer recognizes this. If not, this will be a very short demo, but we'll take a look. Setting up a device. Okay, cool. I think we'll be good. All right, so really what you want to do, let me go ahead and switch out of video device and I'll go back to OBS. Activate. All right. I should have popped back up on your screen. Let me know if I didn't. So what I'm going to go do is, I just want to see. All right, cool, we're set up and ready to go. Yep. You see we have a joystick controller. And basically what I'm doing now, moving it around, you see I can map all the axes that we have. It doesn't always give them like a name that's intuitive, but all the buttons, you notice, are mapped. Anything that has pressure, like even these trigger buttons in the back, like they do have a pressure control. So it's going from 0 to 1, 0 to 1. So all of these are usable at this point. So I have this one on the left, so that's my x-axis and y-axis. I'm looking at my Y right now, 1, -1, x-axis, 1, -1. So basically I have all these options to control Touch Designer with. And I can do anything kind of with this game controller. So an easy one to kind of think about and use is that, like, I have this noise, you know, in the background that I'm using, projection mapped. I might as well use it for something. So what I can do here is I can take this and we just modify like what we go through. So I don't know, let's see, what's a good one to mess with? Maybe period? Yeah, we'll do period on this. So I can just take my period and map it to one of my controls. So we'll grab a select chop. And all I'm gonna do is just steal one of these axes. So I'm just gonna say x-axis. And this is so easy. Like, I mean, like, it just gives it to you, right? So now if I move left to right, you can see that it goes up from -1 to 1. I see from my noise parameter that if I'm looking at the period, if I go to 0, it gets real blown out, and if I go to 2, it's very close. So maybe I want to go to like 0.2 to 2 is what I want to remap it to. So I'll grab a math chop. And I'm going to take this and I'm going to normalize it from range 0 to 1. I'm going to say, okay, so I know that it goes from, oops. You see that? I might unplug it sometimes. If you ever see a caution sign pop up over a joystick, it's because I accidentally unplugged it. So select 1. So I go from -1 to 1. So I know that's my range. -1 to 1. And then I'm going to say we're going to go from 0, we're going to turn that to 0.2 to 2. And now I have something normalized for the value to control this period. So if I grab this and I put it on top of my period and I say export with chop reference, you'll see that what I can do now is that if I move my controller back and forth, I'm changing basically the period that's being mapped back and forth. And you can see that since I have it mapped, hopefully you can see behind me that I can make it larger or smaller based on that. And I could map this to anything, right? This is a very like easy example. Like I could make a circle. We'll just do this real fast. Circle. I could shrink it down a little bit, probably a lot. Let's say maybe 0.1. I could put a transform node on here. And then I can start. So I'll need to change this up a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and break what I just did, which is very easily, you know, like set up my thing to scale up and down, my projection map, being controlled by my controller right now. And it took what? It took like a minute. It took 2 minutes to get that working. You know, it's wild what you can kind of do inside of Touch Designer so quickly, so out of the box. But I'm basically going to repurpose this. So I'm going to clear this. We're just going to set the period back to like 1. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, I'm going to kind of normalize the values. And if you're ever wondering like how to normalize things, just look at like what the range is. So I'm going to translate this and I see, okay, so 0.4 kind of takes me to the edge, 0.4 takes me to the edge, and it's probably the same because it's a square. So I can say, okay, 0.4, yeah, 0.4. So what that means is I want to take my value in math and I want to say, okay, so from range, I kind of know here that the edge is -1 to 1. Okay, so I want to say -0.4 to +0.4. And it's just because I looked at like the bounds. It wasn't anything too complicated. So now if I apply this, again, you should put a null on the end. If you're ever referencing anything, you want to do it from a null because you might need to change something back here and you want to have it available. But I can say on my translate, my transform on the x-axis is going to be driven from my reference. So now, if I take it and I move back and forth, you see that I can control this on the screen. And then, if I select my y-axis, again from the same joystick, very easy. And I just want to select, again here, the y-axis now. jumping ahead of myself. Channel name, y-axis, and do the same thing with my math. It actually should be exactly the same, so I can just copy and paste it. Disconnect, just a different one. And then again, good practice, go from a null. So now if I take this and I plot this against the other transform, make sure you use the channel. That was my mistake. Chop reference. Now I can control the entire thing on the screen just with this controller. You know, so I have it set up, it's ready to go. Positive, negative, so I can basically do a controller. And you could, if you wanted to, make a whole game inside a Touch Designer using the controls. I mean, I basically made a motion controller right now. I've made a control scheme in Touch Designer in like 2 seconds. That's a little fast, but it's super easy and it's super good for stuff like this. And basically I've used one joystick, like I've mapped one joystick to this. I still have all the buttons, all the triggers, basically every button on here. See, I don't think it gives me the start buttons, but it basically gives me everything else. And then you just have all of these as controls to use, like inside a Touch Designer. Like I have my other joystick right here, like on the other side. So I mean, it's just good. Like it's just good to use. And just a quick example of how you can use that, you know, inside of here. And then I could even take this and I could composite it. We're getting into a zany territory now, so hold on. And if you look on my thing, I need to adjust the texture, but hold on. Let's see if you can see my projection map behind me. So now we have my projection map, and I can control it on my projection map via a controller. Like, boing, boing, you know, like move around. You notice the aspect ratio is a little skewed, and that's because I need to correct it in the texture, because this is a square, and what I'm mapping on is a rectangle. But like, that's still pretty cool. So you can get things set up this way inside of Touch, and again, it's very easy. Like, I mean, like how long did this take? Like to do the projection mapping and do the controller setup, like altogether, maybe it would take 10 minutes if I wasn't showing you, like at most. It's just very cool and it's very easy to do. So grab a PS4 controller, grab an Xbox controller, plug it into your computer and you should be good to go. And if you want to projection map something in the background too, you have that capability like all built in. So cool, I think that's gonna take me, whoops. Oof. Don't wipe out here at the end, Ian. Okay, I think it's gonna take me about to the end of my stream today, but hopefully you got something out of it. Again, the feedback stuff at the beginning is just good to know if you want to do anything generative. The instancing stuff is something that I wish I'd learned earlier about how you can combine different kind of operators via the channels and then make an instance that's based on any operator you want, and you can pick and choose from what you want. And then projection mapping, and then again, getting like the basic controller set up inside of Touch Designer. So hopefully that was informative. Hopefully everyone enjoyed watching it and it was a good time. And let me know if you like this thing where I kind of work from scratch versus work from a project. Again, this was a little bit different than how I've done them in the past, but again, like I thought this might work out and hopefully you all got something out of it or some interesting tips. Again, just let me know in the comments if you have questions about anything. I love making these. Hopefully you all had a good time watching it, and yeah, I'll make another one. I think I had a trailer in my last one that I was going to work with some generative AI tools inside Touch Designer. I haven't developed anything that isn't the tutorial I'm taking it from, I guess is the problem. So as soon as I do something like myself that's cool, and I'm not just redoing someone else's tutorial, I'll be sure to put that out and I'll let everyone know ahead of time. But thank you all for chiming in. Hope you enjoyed this, and it should be recorded up on YouTube later if you want to check it out there. So thank you all very much.